Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci fi show where things can get totally radical. Now, today I will be interviewing one of the greats in the first wave of stand up comedy. This is a very special show because this man, he got to be in that first wave of stand up comedy and he got to be involved in 1979 stand-up comedy strike in LA, Tom Dreesen, the legendary Tom Dreesen. I'm going to be interviewing him today, talking about what happened during that first wave of comedy, the strike. He used to open for Sammy Davis Jr. and then Frank Sinatra, and he acted in some movies, and he's had an amazing career, amazing life, and I'm going to find out about him today. And I just can't believe it. It's one of the biggest honors of my life. There's no other way of putting it. I've been watching the man since I was a kid. It's just an honor and a privilege. So, yeah, here is my interview with Tom Dreesen.
Yeah, Tommy.
Hey, Tom.
Sorry about this, Tom. I was up real early, and I was working out, and I thought, hey, I could do the interview now. And then when you didn't call, after I put, I figured, oh, well, he'd call at 9 o'clock, and so I went down to the weight room, and a long story.
Yeah, I woke up from.
I'm yours, and fire away, pal.
I woke up from a nap earlier as well, so I can relate. Well, it's such an honor, sir, because you're from that first wave of stand-up comedy in the '70s, and I appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Mm. I'm glad to do it. I'm glad to do it.
Yes. So, going back to the beginning, were you always funny growing up?
You know, I was in this respect. First of all, I went to Catholic school, so they don't reward you for ad libs. So I had to learn to keep my, keep my sense of humor to myself. But I shined shoes in taverns in my neighborhood. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and we were very poor and lived in a shack. And at one time, like 5 of us slept in one bed. We had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. So as a little boy, I had to sell newspapers on the corner. I shined shoes in taverns. As I got a little older, I set pins in bowling alleys, and I caddied in the summertime to help feed my brothers and sisters. So I would go bar to bar with my shoe shine box, starting when I was 8 years old. There were 36 taverns in the suburb I lived in of Chicago, and there were 8 in my neighborhood. And I would go to this last tavern. It was called the Cedar Lodge. Frank Polizzi owned it, and my mother worked there. She was a bartender. So I would go all 8 bars, shine shoes, and then I would go to her bar last, or the bar where my mother was a bartender, to wait for the shifts to change, and then I'd go back out again. So I'd go to that bar last because, again, my mom was a bartender there. And Frank Polizzi told jokes. He was my mother's brother-in-law. He was married to my mom's sister. He told jokes behind the bar all the time. And as a little boy, I was fascinated that how he could, with his vocabulary and his vernacular, and his inflection and timing, cause this sound to come out of everybody's body in the bar, and it filled the room like electricity. And then it would unite them. I mean, they were all joined together, and I was fascinated by joke telling. So I began to tell some of his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, And so I always enjoyed joke telling. And then, of course, through the years in high school and then into the service, I was a high school dropout, and I went into service when I was the day I turned 17, and I was always telling jokes then. So I had a flair for it. My older brother used to always say, he said, I can't remember a joke, and Tommy's disease is he can't forget one.
Yeah. What did you do before you got into stand-up comedy?
Well, as I told you, as a kid, I had all those jobs, and then we were so raggedy poor, I was embarrassed going to high school sometimes. I worked in bowling alleys setting pins till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning we would set leagues, and then there would be what they call pot games. And we'd set the pot games, and then I have to walk home like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning in the cold winter. It's 2.5 miles to the shack that we lived in, and then get up at 7 o'clock and go to school. So I'd end up falling asleep in the study hall, and and I was a bright young kid, but I just couldn't. There was no place to do homework and all these other things. So finally, at 16, I dropped out, and then I went. I had some little odd jobs at that time, from delivering pizzas to working in a factory. But the day I turned 17, I went in the Navy. And 4 years in the Navy, I came out, and then I worked construction. I worked at a factory, Perfection Gear. I was a bartender always at nighttime, tending bar. I worked with concrete crews, carpenters, as a laborer, from one job to another. By that time, I'm married. I'm starting to get kids. And I was a photographer. My brother Glenn owned a photo studio, so I took pictures at weddings and for newspapers and stuff like that, sports, and I just wandered aimlessly. And then I took a job on a trucking company, and I became a teamster, and I loaded trucks. And then one day the terminal manager came to me and said, you are brighter than most of these guys. He said, you should consider going into management. And I ended up dropping my card and becoming a foreman for Jones Motor Trucking Company. And now the 48 Teamster guys that I used to work with, they now work for me. 24 of those guys said, hey, kid, that's good for you. You know what I mean? Yeah, I wish you the best. And the other 24 said, I wouldn't work for you, you piece of, How I was management, I was the enemy,
Yeah.
It was a real challenge in my life. And from there, too, I ended up selling life insurance. I left there and sold life insurance. And in the first year, I was a member of the $1 Million Roundtable, only because I was in the JCs, a civic group. I joined a civic group called the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and I got to be well known in the community, and so even my cold calls weren't cold calls. So that I was pretty successful, and after a year and a half of that, I left that and went into comedy. And the president of the company from Columbus Mutual Life Insurance, and it was in Columbus, Ohio, but I lived in Chicago. He flew into Chicago and said, I've never done this before, but I've got to tell you, are you out of your mind? He said, you got the best start. We got vested renewals. You got a terrific start. And you're going to go in a business as precarious as show business? But I had the bug, and so it made me want to do it.
Yeah, wow. That's crazy, all those jobs you had before you got into it. What year did you meet Tim Reid?
In 1969, late 68, Tim Reid joined he got graduated from Norfolk State College, and DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep, and he joined the JCs. The night he joined, I had proposed a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor. It's a program that I had written and wanted to do. In those days, they weren't teaching drug education at a college level or a high school level, let alone at an elementary school level. But I thought we had to get to the kids earlier. And JCs in those days worked on civic projects, community projects, to help make the community better, but also teach you leadership, how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, and how to be a leader in your community. So I felt that was one of the biggest problems plaguing our community, and I wanted to do something about it. So the night Tim Reid joined the chapter, I happened to be proposing to the general membership project, and I wanted them to sanction as a JC project. Well, afterwards, Tim Reid came up to me and said, gee, I'd like to work with you on that project. I'm a new member. It's my first night here. And I said, gee, I'm sorry, I already got somebody. And as fate would have it, the next day, the friend I had, John DeBoer, called me and said, Tom, I can't do it. I've got a new job, and so I can't work with you. And the blessing of Tim Reid, I said, gee, what's his name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reid, and I went and got him. Now, John DeBoer's a white guy. Tim Reid, of course, is black. We worked on the project, and the first moment we walked in that classroom, I realized what a blessing this is. The students were black and white, and now here comes a young black and white guy in the classroom playing music, making each other laugh, playing off of one another, and then planting the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. But the kids reacted to us almost immediately because we mirrored them. They had to go to school together and work together, and we were two guys, a black guy and a white guy, doing the same thing, trying to help them. And and the program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries. JCs use it as a model program through their publications on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level. About 7 months into the project, we're playing off of one another, getting the kids laughing, having fun, and then planting the seeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little 8th grade girl, as kids were leaving the classroom, she said, "You guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team." And 2 days later, that we were talking about what that little girl said, and I said, "Are you thinking about what I'm thinking?" Tim said, "Would you do it?" I said, "I'd do it if you do it." And we didn't know what to do, but we thought a black-white comedy team. There had never been a black-white comedy team before, nor was there one after.
Mm-hmm.
We were America's first and the last black and white comedy team. and so and that was, by the way, that was 50 years ago. We started 1969. So, and there's never been one since. I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
There was never a black and white comedy team before, but there's never been one since. That speaks volumes. So we went, we started rehearsing what we thought was funny stuff, and we rehearsed for like 2-3 months before we finally had the courage to go out and do it. But there were no comedy clubs in those days. There were no such things as open mics and things like that. You had to go find a job in a nightclub. And, we found a little jazz club that would let us get up when the jazz trio took a break. So we convinced the owner that we were a new comedy team. Could we get up and try out? And he said, "Yeah, sure." So we got up there and just went through it 100 miles an hour. We didn't pause for any laughs or anything. We just wanted to remember the words. So we got up there and, "Hi, we're the comedy team. It's Tom. He's Tim. I'm Tom. And we kept babbling. And we came off stage, and the owner, we rushed him into a corner. How'd we do? What'd you think? How'd we do?" He said, "I don't know how you did. You never gave me a chance to laugh. Come back tomorrow night and slow down." So we went back the next night, and we got over, and then had the bug. So we struggled. There were no comedy clubs. We worked all black clubs in the North and the South, and we worked all white clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Black clubs were affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear in Chicago, the Guys and Gals Lounge in Chicago, the Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City before they had gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked all black clubs, and then we finally got on the Playboy circuit, and we worked, all white clubs in the North and South, all black clubs, and paid dues like no other act ever had to pay dues.
Mm-hmm.
The 4th time on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face.
Wow.
Had to beat the hell out of me, and I boxed him when I was in the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. No one ever had to pay the kind of dues that we had to pay. And in those days, America was in turmoil. The Vietnam War was raging. I had just gotten out of the service.
Mm-hmm.
The Vietnam War was raging. Students were protesting all over America. African Americans were rioting in almost every major city, so that was the backdrop. And so it was a very difficult time for us. However, 95% of the people who saw us liked what we did.
Yeah.
But it was that 5% element that you had to really worry about, because if we worked an all-black club and there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me. You see, Tim would be an Uncle Tom.
Yeah.
If it was a white guy, a redneck who hated black people with a passion, he wasn't mad at Tim. He's mad at me. See, I'm the N-word lover, and they didn't mind catching me in a men's room down in Atlanta, Georgia, and try to do a number on me. I mean, we had that element, but we persevered. And again, 95% of people who saw us liked us, but we struggled and struggled and struggled, and then we did some national television, got an album out, but then one day Tim just decided he wanted to go it alone, and he did, and broke up the act, and then we both now are still the best of friends, and
That's good.
wrote a book called Tim and Tom, An American Comedy in Black and White, and we hope that makes that a movie here shortly.
Nice. Yeah. At least they didn't compare you guys to Amos and Andy.
No, that would not be a good comparison at all.
No.
We were clever and good, and especially after we worked the Playboy circuit, we began to our timing, because the Playboy circuit, you end up doing 4 and 5 and 6 shows a night sometimes, and so your timing became impeccable. We got a review years ago sometime to watch Tim and Tom work is like watching a master ping pong match. It
Mm-hmm. When did you get to the Comedy Store?
And when the comedy team broke up, we started out in 1969. So around 1974, late, I moved out to the West Coast. I came out here, left my wife and kids in Chicago, and tried to get on at the Comedy Store. And that's when Johnny Carson had come from New York,
Mm-hmm.
1972, to come out to the West Coast. And Sunset Strip was bustling with excitement. If you could get on the Tonight Show, one appearance on the Tonight Show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day. One appearance on that show launched you in your career. Wherever you went in America in those days, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, you ever been on Johnny Carson?" And if you
Yeah.
had been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. You might want to be one, you might going to be one, but you weren't one now.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the shows that were out there in those days, Mike Douglas, Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Rock Concert, Midnight Special, Soul Train, American Bandstand, all those shows are using stand-up comedians. But the Tonight Show was the one that launched you. And
Mm-hmm.
Comedy Store had just opened up on the Sunset Strip. And it was so exciting because every night someone was getting discovered. So
Mm-hmm.
the pressure to get on at the Comedy Store, I hung out for almost a month before I got an open mic night, where Mitzi Shore, the owner of the Comedy Store, gave me a chance to do 5 minutes. And if she liked you, then you got on the regular schedule,
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, so I finally, after about a month, got a chance to get up and do 5 minutes. And I came off stage, and she said, "Well, you seem to have, worked before, and you got some stage presence. We'll work you into the schedule." And I said to her, "Mitzi, I can MC too." And she said, "Well, that's interesting," because I figured I could get up, do stand up, then bring up the other acts, and then do a couple jokes in between, trying out new material,
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing that. And it took a while, and I ended up finally pestering the Tonight Show coordinators, Craig Tennis, Bob Dolce, Howard Papish, Paul Gold. I would
Mm-hmm.
howl out of them to get them to come to see me, and they finally came to see me, and I got the Tonight Show, and then I got bumped 3 times in a row. Every time I went there, they ran out of time.
Wow.
You get makeup, you get in your dressing room, you're preparing. 20 to 25 million people watch that show every night. The pressure was incredibly, it was enormous. I mean, because you knew not only were talent coordinators and casting people and other shows and Vegas and Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City people, bookers, watch that show, but your mother had everybody in the old neighborhood watching the show, so if you bombed, you couldn't even go back home,
Mm-hmm.
The first Tonight Show, there's no describing. Every time you get makeup, they put you in your dressing room, they bring you down to the green room, and then they bumped me. They ran out of time. They did that 3 times in a row. On the 4th time, I go and I'm in makeup, and Fred Cordova came in and said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." Now, you walk that long walk from the green room to get behind the curtain when it was your time to go on.
Mm-hmm.
That night, Bert Convy and Carol Burnett were on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And Bert Convy was singing a song when they came and got me and said, "Okay, you're going on next." You take that long walk. Now, after you become a veteran, the stage hands that are all backstage, "Hey, Dreesen, how's your Cubs? And I don't think they got a good team this year." They all have fun with you. But that first time, when you're taking that long walk, they turn their backs on you and they whisper, "It's his first time. It's his first time."
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you get behind the curtain, Doc Severinson's playing the music, and so they're in commercial break. And the coordinator said, "Are you all right?" You say, "I'm fine. Thank you." And he walks away, and now you can't remember your first joke, and now you're walking back and forth. and the band's playing. Now the music stops, so you're back live. Your heart stops,
Yeah.
Johnny said, "We're back now, and I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight, because my next guest is making his first appearance on the Tonight Show. Would you welcome, please, Tom Dreesen?" That one line, "I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight." He subtly says to them, "Be gentle. This is his first time, And I walk out. They open up the curtain, and you walk out and into that bright light. You got to look for. There's a spot on the floor that green tape there. You hit that spot, and you got to really be, you can't see the audience, and you got to be a bully, and you got to be up, So anyhow, I got through the first joke and I got a laugh. I got through the second joke and I got a laugh. And I got through the third joke my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and you've been a wonderful audience. I want to ask you a favor. Show business is a tough life. So if you like me, just if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell them about me, will you please? And night, everybody. And I walked through the curtain, and the coordinator come running around. Go back, go back. I said, go back and talk to Johnny. No, don't go back to talk to Johnny, but go back. So I went back to the curtain, and they called me back for a second bow. And Johnny Carson gave me that little circle that he used to give, like
Yeah.
I went back to the curtain, and everybody backstage was mobbing me, and a great shot. And I never have stopped working since that first Tonight Show.
Wow.
I ended up doing 61 appearances on the Tonight Show in my career, and over 50 on Letterman, and I hosted David Letterman's show. But that first appearance on Johnny Carson's show, I never stopped working from that time on. And then all the other shows opened up, like I say, Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Rock Concert, Soul Train, Midnight Special. I did Hollywood Squares. I was doing game shows, Match Game, $20,000 Pyramid. All of a sudden, I was working everywhere. I did a TV show called Sammy and Company for Sammy Davis Jr. He ended up taking liking me. I did a stand-up on his show that just went over real big. He said on the air, "I'm taking you on the road with me." And he took me on the road for 3 years, touring with him. And then it just a whole new career. I went from there to acting in sitcoms and Murder, She Wrote, and Columbo, and then on to touring with Sammy for 3 years, and then Smokey Robinson and Gladys Knight and the Pits, Natalie Cole, Mac Davis, I was Tony Orlando and Don. I was being yanked from one end of the country to the other because I could work clean, and that's what most of those acts I just told you about had family audiences coming to see them.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, finally, Frank Sinatra, and I did that for 14 years.
Yeah, that's amazing to be opening for Frank Sinatra. I mean, in the world of show business, that's like shooting heroin with Miles Davis.
I always say I was an altar boy. That's a very funny night. Shooting heroin.
Thank you.
Miles Davis. That's very funny. But I always used to say I was an altar boy when I was growing up. So being an opening act for Frank Sinatra would be like being an altar boy for the Pope.
Yeah.
Just when you were in that rarefied air.
Yeah. You also worked with Dean Martin.
Yeah, I did the Dean Martin shows, and I played golf with Dean too. I loved Dean. He was just an incredible guy. He just was I just really enjoyed it. I mean, I love Frank too. I was a pallbearer at Frank's funeral, but Dean was he was a special kind of guy. It's hard to describe him sometimes. Sometimes he wouldn't say anything all day long, and then he'd say one line, and you would fall off the chair laughing. He had just a way. He had a way about him, and he cracked Frank up all the time. He always made Frank laugh.
Yeah, he was a guy who used to go to restaurants by himself, people say, and he would just sit there and be very quiet and all that.
In the end, it was that way, Tommy. But when I first met him, he would go to a place called the Hamburger Hamlet on Sunset Boulevard after a round of golf, and he'd sit around and shoot the breeze with 5 or 6 guys. But in the end, he wanted to be alone, and he would go to a restaurant called La Familia, and he would sit in the corner. And I'd go in sometimes, and see him. Dennis Farina and I would stop in there, and we'd send a drink over to him. He'd send one over to us, but he wanted to be left alone. I'd be eating, and he'd say across the restaurant, Tommy, and I'd look over and he'd say, Tommy,
Yeah.
spent 4 hours in the shower today. I said, you did? He said, yeah, tomorrow I'm going to turn the water on. That kind of stuff,
Oh, that's great. Who was so in that era? Who was at the Comedy Store?
I would go on stage when I first went there with all these unknowns. I'd be going on stage every night with Robin Williams, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Gallagher, Michael Keaton. Earl waiting tables was Deborah Winger. And there's a lot of people that were there that are no longer in comedy. Tim Thomerson went into.
Oh, he was great.
Had a great career.
Yeah, he was great.
It was an interesting time. Again, when Johnny Carson came out to the West Coast and one appearance on The Tonight Show could launch your career, comics from all over the country migrated out here. The Jay Leno's from Boston, the David Letterman's from Indianapolis, the Tom Dreesens from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, after the Comedy Store was here a few years, the improvisation moved out here and gave them some competition. And, but at one time, that was the only game in town. And to audition for Mitzi, was as nerve-wracking as auditioning for The Tonight Show. Because at one time, the Comedy Store was the only game in town. So if you didn't score and get on that schedule, it was going to be real difficult to get exposure to be seen by these other shows,
Mm-hmm.
Every night at the Comedy Store, somebody would come off stage, I just got Merv Griffin, I just got Mike Douglas I just got cast in a sitcom, the buzz was there because all these talent coordinators, like I say, came there to find a new talent, and comedy was the rock and roll of the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It was all of a sudden new comedians being discovered everywhere, where before it took years to develop and stuff, It was a very, very exciting time.
Yeah, I mean, the Midnight Special was going on, and Don Kirshner's rock concert and all that. Yeah, there's a lot of guys there that most people don't even remember, like Billy Braver and Murray Langston and Tom Sharp and guys like that.
Sure. Yeah. Murray was the unknown comedian, the comic with the bag over his head.
Yeah.
And Billy Braver had a different style of anybody else. He was this poor, sick little guy. His whole act was about hypochondria,
Yeah.
I remember he said, the doctor told me that I shouldn't have hair on my chest because it puts too much of a strain on my heart. Yeah, that kind of material. And Murray and Tom Sharp was a very good comedian as well. I mean, there were a lot of real good comedians who never made it as stand-ups that because it's such a grind to be able to write a funny 5 or 6 minute original monologue for the Tonight Show. Johnny didn't want two guys going to bar jokes.
Yeah.
The original monologue. To write one of those is difficult. To write 4 or 5, and I did 61. So you're in a constant state of writing new material all the time. And sometimes good comedians with good delivery are not good at writing jokes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could buy jokes, but most of them were struggling. If you were Bob Hope, you bought jokes, but if you were Joe Smith, and you didn't have any money, you had to rely on your writing skills. I dare say a comedian won't last a lifetime unless he's a pretty good writer.
Mm-hmm.
If he's got money, like Jerry Seinfeld, he can hire 5 and 10 and 20 writers,
Mm-hmm.
or that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I've been there 3 times, and all 3 times, I feel the presence of dead comedians in that place, but I look at the headshots on the walls of all these guys who like never made it, and it's very haunting over there, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, it's a strange place. It has a lot of joy. When we worked there, we had a lot of fun. We really did. After the shows, we would all go to Cantor's and hang and root for one another. I mean, I felt that way. If David Letterman or Jay Leno saw me working one night, and they saw something that might be funny in my act, they would come and tell me. It's the same way with if I saw David or Jay and they were doing a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw a way to punch that up. We shared that kind of camaraderie. Later, as you know, there was a book written about the Comedy Store called "I'm Dying Up Here."
Right.
And in it, a guy named William Needlecedar, who had been a writer with the L.A. Times, had written thousands of stories with the L.A. Times, but remembered 3 that would stick out in his mind. One was when we went on strike at the Comedy Store, and and because of that book, "I'm Dying Up Here," they did a TV series on Showtime.
Yep.
But the one thing that was lacking that Letterman and Leno and I have talked about many times was it looked like they weren't having any fun in those days, and we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. I know, because it's like they're taking today's model of comedians. A lot of comedians are miserable now today, and I know because I'm one of this generation's comedians. But yeah, they don't put any element of fun into the show. And I liked the first season. I didn't like the second season. I thought it just got too dark after that.
I've heard that more than once from people. That's what David and Jay both said to me. We had fun. They don't show that we had any fun. First of all, 85% of all, this is my humble opinion,
Mm-hmm.
in 50 years as a stand-up comedian, 85% of all stand-up comedians are insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, loved, starved wrecks, total wrecks. The other 15% are gifted, confident people who say, I know how to write a joke, and I know how to tell one. I like to think that I'm in the latter, but never trust somebody that tells you they're sane.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make them bad people because of insecure, neurotic, love, starved wrecks. But my point of this is, and it's classic, if you're an insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, love-starved wreck, when you're poor and unknown, you're rich and famous, it doesn't get better, Tommy. It gets worse. Because you thought rich and famous was going to take away all this angst. And when it doesn't, you're left with, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've known 5 real good stand-up comedians who committed suicide. 5. I know another 25 who let alcohol and drugs take them down the drain. It's a precarious business. I love stand-up comedy. I enjoy it. I enjoyed when I was a kid telling jokes. Last Saturday I tried out some new material at the Laugh Factory, and it killed, and it was just one of those great nights that you're on your way home in the car, and you never lose that, or I don't ever lose that joy of writing 2 or 3 new jokes, and they work. And they work. A lot of, we're artists, comedians, and if you're a comedy writer, you're an artist. A lot of artists that paint, they don't know whether their paintings are good till 20 years after they're dead or 100 years after they're dead. We comedians can write something creative in the afternoon and that night find out whether our artistry is working. You know what I mean? It's an exciting life. To me, in my opinion, as dark as it can be sometimes, because there are highs and lows, and the stand-up comedy is the highest of highs and it's the lowest of lows. Highest of highs when it works and lowest of lows when it doesn't. But to me, it is the single greatest profession on the planet. Not because that's what I do, but if you analyze it, comedy, laughter is healing. I'm going a long way around here, but I'll try to make it short. There was a guy named Norman Cousins who was the editor of a magazine called the Saturday Review. And Norman Cousins was told that he was going to die. He was in the hospital. They told me he had a terminal illness due to some heart conditions, and they said because of stress, negative input in his life made him ill. He laid in the hospital bed knowing he was going to die, and he said, if negative input made me ill, then positive input should make me well. He checked out of the hospital, and he would only watch I Love Lucy reruns, Candid Camera, Three Stooges, The Marx Brothers. He never would watch the evening news. He would read funny books and also listen to comedy albums. He lived 27 years after the doctors told him he was going to die. And because of him, UCLA did some research on how laughter affects the human body. We've always known that laughter is a psychological deterrent, that the brain can't think of 2 thoughts at the same time. So if you're laughing at something, you're not thinking of your problems. So it's a psychological deterrent. They found out later, when the human body laughs, they did more research, that a certain endorphin is released from the brain into the bloodstream, that your body goes through an actual chemical reaction, because that's why after a hearty laugh, you laugh, and then you go, oh, and tears run down your eyes because a sense of relief comes over your whole body. Your body's gone through an actual chemical change. So laughter is not only psychologically a deterrent, it's physiologically therapeutic. So we now know that comedians are physicians of the soul. So we can call each other Dr. Kovac or Dr. Dreesen.
Yes.
My point of that is, it's the greatest profession on the planet because people walk away from your job feeling better and healing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, what you're saying is laughter is the best medicine.
Well, that's been said for years in the Reader's Digest, and it's true. They go back 10,000 years ago, and I've read research on this, where the Indian tribes had one medicine man who made you laugh. And even back then, as primitive as they were, they knew that laughter had value. And, so comedians, I always tell them all the time, you're in the finest profession on the planet. Don't tarnish that. That you have the ability to make people laugh is a God-given gift. You've worked hard on developing and taking it further, taken to its max. But don't tarnish that gift because you're special. don't do drugs and destroy your brain and alcohol and destroy your brain because you've got a God-given gift. Insurance Companies of America did a survey many years ago on the 10 fears of man.
Mm-hmm.
They went around the country for like 8 years. The 10 fears of man. Death was fourth. Pain was second. Getting up in front of an audience was the number one fear of mankind. If you can get up in front of an audience as a house painter or a lawyer or a landscaper, and you can talk for 1 hour on your profession,
Mm-hmm.
you're in less than 1/10 of 1% of the population of the world. If you can get up for 1 hour and make people laugh for 1 hour in front of an audience, you're in less than 1/1,000,000 of 1% of the audience of the world. So this is a gift that you have. Nurture it, work on it, develop it, keep growing in that craft because you have a God-given gift and you're a special human being. If you can do that.
Mm-hmm. So true. Now, I know you've talked about this a million times, but in 1979, the strike happened because Mitzi and Bud didn't pay their comics. I've heard many different versions of how it started, but coming from you, exactly what happened?
Well, you can read the book "I'm Dying Up Here" by William Needlesheeter, and you'll find that it is a precise and accurate description historically. But what happened? I was working at the Comedy Store, and I went on. I was the first one out of there doing the Tonight Show, and I went on there, like I say, touring with Sammy Davis and different artists. But I was touring with Sammy Davis, and every time I'd come off the road, I would go to I would sign up to go on at the Comedy Store, working on new material to do my next Tonight Show or my next Merv Griffin or whatever it was I was doing. And we always went in what they call the original room. It seats like 110 people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we tried out our new material and everything. In the main room, Mitzi had bought another section of the Comedy Store. Excuse me, a guy named Art LeBeau. Excuse me.
Yeah.
That part of the building, and Mitzi bought that half and turned it into what they call the main room, where it seated like 450 people. And there, she hired Rodney Dangerfield, and he'd get the door, or Jackie Mason, he'd get the door. So the bigger name comedians would work there, and they'd get the door. We worked for free. We never got paid at the Comedy Store, But I never, never complained about that because I was learning my craft. So I come back off the road one time, and I signed up at the Comedy Store. I called in, and they said, "Yeah, Tom, you're on Saturday night." I go over the Saturday night, and I go in the original room. They said, "Oh, Tom, you're in the main room." I said, "The main room?" Yeah, and I'm on the main room with Robin Williams, David Letterman, Gallagher, Elaine Boozler, Jay Leno, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is like working Vegas. It was a big room and everything. That night, as we all did, we all go over to Cantor's restaurant, and we'd all gather and sit around and talk till 2, 3 in the morning. I'm over there having a good time, and Jay Leno walks in, and he said, "This is BS. This is absolutely BS. Can I swear on your podcast?"
Oh, yeah, swear all you want, Tom.
Okay, well, I'm going to be authentic. He said, "This is bullshit. This is bullshit. That she pays. Rodney Dangerfield gets the door. Jackie Mason gets the door. I mean, maybe it took 5 of us to fill that room, but we filled that room to be getting paid. This is ridiculous." And some of the other comics said, "Yeah, it's Monday night. Sometimes it's crowded too." And they all start talking about it. And then they decided they were going to have a meeting. I'm on my way. I'm already working Vegas, Tahoe, Reno, Atlantic City. But I go to the meeting because these are my peers and my friends, and it was chaotic, absolutely chaotic. Everybody's talking at the same time. They weren't getting anything resolved, and Gallagher saying, "We got to burn the place down," and that kind of stuff. And the only thing they decided at that meeting was have another meeting. So I go to the second meeting that they're having, and this time it's again chaotic. And because of my background in the JCs, I knew Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct a meeting, I knew how to organize and conduct meetings. So I finally took the floor and I said, "Look, we're not getting anything resolved. I will chair this meeting and get it in order." And now they're all talking. I said, "No, hold on, Gallagher, be quiet." Jay, then I said, "Jay, make your point," and Jay would say something, then something, and I kept them organized. I kept them. Then they would start putting in a form of motions. All in favor of that say aye, oppose. Now, then I start forming committees with them, and then subcommittees, and putting certain people in charge of certain things, and got them really well organized. And then I went to talk to Mitzi. And I sat down and told her, I said, the comedians are organized. They want to be paid, Mitzi. I think it's fair now. She was making millions of dollars. She had the Westwood Comedy Store. She had a comedy store in La Jolla. And she was making a lot of money. And nobody begrudged her that, by the way. And I liked Mitzi. And this was very painful for me because I really liked her. Her and I had a great relationship. But, again, I'm speaking for the comedians. She said, no, they don't deserve to be paid, blah, blah. And I kept taking her messages back to the comics and then going with the comics message back to her. And there was no way she was going to pay. One night, I got Paul Mooney, George Miller, and Tim Thomerson, and we all four went over her house around 10 o'clock at night to talk to her about paying the comedians. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Tim Thomerson was passed out cold. George Miller was sleeping at the bar. Paul Mooney was sitting in a chair sleeping, and me and Mitzi were still haggling. There was no way she was going to pay the comedians. And finally, the comedians decided they wanted to go on strike. And I went to Mitzi one last time. I said, Mitzi, these kids are organized. Once you get them organized, my era, comedians came out of ghettos and poor neighborhoods. That era, they were coming out of universities. And once you got them organized, they were a force to be reckoned with. And I told her that, but she said she's simply not going to pay the comedians, and they decided to go on strike. And it got worldwide news. Comedians on strike. No one had ever heard of that before. Sunset Boulevard was packed with cars and cameras, and then the comedians decided that we should not convolute our message with 20 comedians talking at the same time. They said, let's vote for one person to be our spokesperson and get in front of the cameras. And Dottie Archibald said, I think they nominated Tom Dreesen. He's been involved. And I didn't really want to do this. I wanted to help them, but I have a career. Anyhow, long story short, I ended up being the spokesperson. And now Mitzi had, of the 100 and something comedians, 19 crossed the picket line, 18 guys and one girl. And that kept the place going for a little bit. In the meantime, I had to turn down like 6 weeks of work with Sammy Davis Jr. And in those days, for a lot of money, which for me, because I was in a fight now, and like I say, I boxed when I was in the Navy. I've always played sports. I'm very competitive by nature, and if I get in a fight, then I want to win. I'm not necessarily talking about a physical fight, but I'm talking about any kind of, some kind of debate. I'm competitive. I want to win. So now I decided I was going to stick this out. Well, it lasted way longer than I thought it would last. And it got ugly. It got really ugly. There were fights, and there were, it got to the point, if I wasn't on the picket line or Johnny Witherspoon, they one time attacked Elaine Boozler, some of Mitzi's loyalists, and then there was a gay comedian named Falstaff. They gave him a black eye. They punched him in the eye. So we got where Johnny Witherspoon and I, one of us had to be on the picket line. And it went back and forth and back and forth. And then there was a meeting. We had a waitress named Robin that was our loyalist. She worked in the comedy store, but she would come out and tell us what they were saying at their private meetings. We had a spy on the inside. Yeah. And she said that the Improv was open, and Mitzi said to her loyalists, the comedians are going on strike, and in the back of the room, two guys said, the comedians aren't going to go on strike. They need a place to work. And Mitzi said, well, maybe they'll work at the Improv. And the other guy said, what if there was no Improv? And 2 days later, somebody threw a Molotov cocktail on top of the roof and burned the Improv down. Yeah. You know who it was. We all know who it was. I won't mention it here, but because they're both dead now. But now Bud come to me and said, the front part of the Improv is open. If you strike me, Tom, it will devastate me. I said, but we don't want to go on strike. We want to go on strike anywhere. Will you sign a memo that if we will work the front of the place while you're rebuilding, and then after you're rebuilt and ready to go, you'll sit down in good faith, negotiate to pay the comedians. And he said, absolutely, and he signed it. And so that when we were walking the picket line, we could send people over to the Improv where we all went later and got up and did stand-up, So even though the place smelled from burnt wood, it wasn't the most pleasant place I ever worked. So, it lasted 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks, I had to speak before the Screen Actors Guild. And Mitzi sent over two guys, Danny Mora and Biff Maynard to speak on her behalf. And I was was with Joanne Astor and Mark Linnell, and we spoke at a Screen Actor after meeting, asking for their support. Well, after hearing both sides speak, they decided to support us, and so they said that they would take a full-page ad out in the Variety and Hollywood Reporter, asking all the actors in Hollywood not to cross the picket line and stand by us comedians. I go back to the Comedy Store to tell the kids that are walking the picket line. There's an alley along the Comedy Store where Mitzi got an injunction that we could not walk across it because it was blocking cars from coming in. So we had to walk in front of the store. While I go back, all the kids say, "What's going on? What's going on?" I told them we won the debate and that we're going to get support from SAG and AFTRA. Just then I hear across the street engines racing. Vroom, vroom, vroom. I look up and I see it's Biff Maynard, the guy who lost the debate, and he's going to wait for the traffic to go by, and he's going to go flying into that driveway, and he's racing the engine as much as he can, and I see some people in that lane, and I say to the comedians, "Get out of there, get out of there, get out," and I hear tires screeching and rubber burning, and he goes flying past the crowd, and I hear thump, and he goes in the back and slams on his brakes, and I see Jay Leno laying on the ground.
Oh, God.
Girls start screaming, oh my God, he hit Jay. And somebody call an ambulance. We didn't have cell phones in those days. Call an ambulance. Jay's laying on the ground. At that moment, Tommy, my brain had snapped. I had just had enough of this 8 weeks of this debate, this fighting. My family, I'm suffering because I turned down the work. I was ready to snap, and I made up my mind that I was going to crack Biff Maynard's jaw when he got to me. I was going to just throw a punch and nail him, because Jay's laying there on the ground where it looks like his eyes are in the back of his head, and Maynard's in the back and they're yelling, you hit him, and he said, I didn't see anybody, and I kneel down, and I'm Jay, and he opens up his eyes and he winks at me. He winked. There was nothing wrong with him. What I didn't know was when the car went flying by, Jay hit it with his hand, and then he fell on the ground. So now, Jay maybe did. They got ambulance. Woo, ambulances are coming. Now, Jay doesn't want to go in the ambulance, but there's a state law that when the ambulance comes, they have to take you to, they can't release you. You have to be released by a physician at the hospital, right? So now they haul Jay away,
Yeah.
And meanwhile, that moment, Mitzi sent somebody out and said, Mitzi wants to talk to you. I went inside. She said, let's settle this thing once and for all. We can't go on like this. And that night we settled the strike. Now, after 3 weeks, reorganizing everything, I'm going back on the road.
Right.
I said goodbye to all the comedians, and you guys are on your own now, and form committees and all these other things, and they called themselves AFA, American Federation of Comedians. Well, Steve Lebetkin, one of the comedians, comes up to me as I'm leaving the meeting. I got to go to the airport, and I'm going on the road with Sammy Davis. We're going to work in Lake Tahoe. I also had a meeting with George Slaughter before I got to the airport. He wanted me to host a show called Real People, which I turned down. I didn't want to host it. But meantime, all the comics get around me talking, and I'm saying, look, I got to go. My ex-wife was with me, and she's saying, come on, you're going to miss the meeting in the plane. And George Miller's talking to me, and Steve Lebetkin. And Steve Lebetkin is saying, please, Tommy, don't leave the group. I've called in for the last 3 weeks, and she won't give us any times. And I said to him, it's in the contract. She can't do that. No retaliation. He said, Tommy, but 3 weeks in a row, and she hasn't given me any times, Tommy. He's real forlorn. And my wife's pulling one arm, and George Miller's trying to talk to me. And finally, I turned around and said to Steve, and he was desperate. I said, Steve, I won't go back till you go back. I give you my word. I won't go back till you go back. And I put my hands on his shoulders. I said, look at me. I'm not going to go back till you go back. All right. Well, I go do my meet, go to Tahoe. A week later, Steve Lebetkin called in for his 4th time. He didn't get any times. So I'm ready to go on stage in Lake Tahoe. Jay Leno calls my dressing room. He thought I just got off stage. I was just ready to go on. He said Steve Lebetkin committed suicide. He went on top of the Continental Hyatt House next door to the Comedy Store, and he wrote a suicide note. My name is Steve Lebetkin. I used to work at the Comedy Store. And he jumped off the top of the Hyatt House and landed on the ramp where the cars go up into the parking garage. He never made it to the Comedy Store, but he killed himself there. It was the hardest show I ever had to do in my life. I had to go on stage, and I just was sick to my stomach over this whole thing. And a year later, I mean, on his anniversary, first of all, somebody went in the Comedy Store and took a picture of his. It was a big picture. Mitch used to have big, like 20 by 20 photos of us. They found it, I guess, in the basement, and they took it upstairs and put it in Mitchie's chair when she came in to work that morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, on the first 2 years of the anniversary of his death, somebody laid a dummy where he landed, and they think it was his girlfriend that did this, and that had a sign around its neck that said, "My name is Steve Lebetkin. I used to work at the Comedy Store." They had a suicide note. So thus is the title, "I'm Dying Up Here." It's a double entendre, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
We comedians say, "I died last night," and then that was the title of the book. And that was the truth. And I never went back to the Comedy Store for over 40 years, and Mike Binder called me recently and said, "I'm doing a documentary on the Comedy Store of each class, like the era of David Letterman, Jay Leno, Tom Dreesen, Robin Williams, those guys." And Michael Binder was part of that class too.
Right.
He's a director now. But then they're going to the next, the Sam Kinnisons, and then on and on and on. And they're doing 4 episodes, and Showtime is going to air them.
Awesome.
So they said, "Would you come back?" Peter Shore, Mitchie's son, asked me if I would come back. I never went back because I gave Steve my word. I won't go back till you go back. But over 40 years went by, and I went back, and they filmed me, and it's going to be in this documentary.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. The first time I walked up that ramp at the Comedy Store, I had just got this shudder down my back because I know that's where he landed, and it was just so profound. It was.
Yeah, I mean, I had never gone back, and when Mike did this, he actually filmed me. Behind me was where Steve landed, and it did the same thing to me too. I mean, I never blame Mitchie for that. I don't blame Steve. Like most comedians, was an insecure, neurotic wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And this, he thought if he didn't work the Comedy Store, his life was over. I mean, obviously he had problems, I just thought, I felt so bad that I worked so hard on that to win that thing that I wished I had never done nothing. Who knows what would have happened, but I really felt in principle it was fair that if you're charging a cover charge, and I told Mitchie, I went to Mitchie one time, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I jumped out of bed, and my ex-wife scared the hell out of me. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, I got it. Why didn't I think of this? I got it. I couldn't sleep all night long. I was in her office at 10 o'clock in the morning waiting for her to come in. I said, "Mitchie, I got it. You're charging $5 at the door. Charge $6. Let the comics have that $1. If 200 people show up, the comics that night split $200. If 20 people show up, they split $20. I said, let them just charge $1 more at the door." She said, "No, they don't deserve to be paid. And this is a college. This is a learning place." But, so I left there numb because, see, I thought it was about money.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was about money, and when I found out it wasn't about money, it was about control. That she felt like it would be wrong to pay the comedians, and that was her thoughts, and that's what caused the strike to go on and on and on.
Yeah. I want to ask you about some of your acting roles. You worked with the very funny comic Johnny Yoon in They Call Me Bruce.
Yeah, in fact, and a lot of other. I've done a lot of Spaceballs, Mel Brooks, and I just did a movie, Trouble with the Curve, with Clint Eastwood, and I've done some film and some sitcom acting and stuff like that. But I love stand-up comedy. I don't love acting. Acting, stand-up comedy. In Vegas, you say, "You're on at 8 o'clock, Tom." Okay, at 7:30, I'd start wandering down to the casino, be in my dressing room at 7:45, on stage at 8 and off at 8:30 or whatever time it is, and you pay, and it's over. Acting, you're going to do a scene with Angela Lansbury and Murder, She Wrote, and you get there at 5:30 in the morning, and you go in your trailer, and around 5 o'clock that night, you're filming that scene.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that kind of stuff, the waiting.
Yeah. Do you know whatever happened to Johnny Yoon?
He went to South Korea. He married a very wealthy woman, and he had a talk show in South Korea, kind of like Johnny Carson. And he stays in touch with me every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
He's a wonderful, wonderful man who also sang in 11 different languages.
Wow.
And he sang opera.
Wow.
Que bella cosa, nato sole. He sang with his deep, uh, you know, voice, Pavarotti kind of singing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All the other, a lot of the other comics who fell out, But as far as acting, I studied acting in Chicago, and I studied acting in L.A. And I'll give you a great story.
Okay.
There's two methods of acting. There's many methods, but the standouts are Boleslavsky and Stanislavski. Method or technique. A method actor or a technique actor. And you know the difference between the two, right, Tommy? I mean, a method actor conjures up images of his child or his life or something,
right.
Uses that feeling to get to the scene. And a technique actor has different techniques. They do it more mechanical, but both work. But a classic example of that is a Russian actor was being interviewed one time, and he said, the interviewer saying, you've been in this play for the last year and a half. And every night there's a moment when you hold your brother's dying, and you hold his head in your arms, and tears come out of your eyes like clockwork every night. A tear out of your right eye, then out of your left eye, and before you know it, you're sobbing. How do you do that night after night after night? He said, when I was a little boy, I have a dog named Buki, and I love my dog Buki, and my dog Buki get hit by a truck and die. Every night I hold my brother's head in my arms. I think of my little Buki, and I cry. If that doesn't work, I pull a hair out of my nose.
Oh, my God.
It doesn't matter how you get there, Tommy. You can get, there's a lot of ways to get there, And then mostly acting is reacting. Knowing your lines, look the other guy in the eye and tell the truth, But, or the other person in the eye. But it's reacting. If you, when you say something to me, I react to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's hard for actors to go on cold readings, and they'll say, you're going to be reading with my secretary, Louise, and she has no acting skills at all. And she says, why are you holding that knife to my throat, Gregory? And of course, because she can't act, you can't react, so you go over the top. I'm doing it because. So it's great to do scenes with good actors, and knowing their lines as well as yours, and then you react to what they say. So acting is reacting,
Mm-hmm. I remember you were in that John Ritter TV movie of the week, Sunset Limousine.
Yeah, I played myself in that movie, though. That was an art. Same way with Man in the Moon, about Andy Kaufman. I played myself in that movie,
Yeah.
I would tell you about something interesting about acting. Frank Sinatra won the Academy Award in From Here to Eternity.
Right.
He should have won the Academy Award in A Man with the Golden Arm, or a movie called The Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah.
He did over 60 films. He was a brilliant actor.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting around with him one night at his house with Gregory Peck, with Kirk Douglas, Clint Eastwood, Robert Wagner, all these wonderful actors. They were talking about film, and I was fascinated just listening to them. And I got curious. I said to Frank, who did you study with? I want to know, who he studied with. And Gregory Peck, I said, did you ever study acting? And Gregory Peck grabbed my arm and said, acting lessons would have ruined him. He was a diamond in the rough you didn't fool with. He danced with Gene Kelly, for God's sake. This was a brilliant talent. So when he got a song, to him it was a script. What writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? So he would immerse himself into the lyric and become that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him, and he's never going to find love again. You felt that emotion, and you felt the joy of songs. Come fly with me, let's fly away. He was an actor repeating what the writer wrote when the writer felt that way. If you ever are alone in a bar, your woman left you, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you really are down in the dumps, and one of his songs comes on, like One for My Baby and One More for the Road, or how about a song called If You Go Away? If that song comes on the jukebox, before it's over with, he'll put a gun in your mouth. I mean, he really, you feel that feeling of that lonely guy,
Yeah.
Brilliant actor.
Yeah, he was great. And Sinatra should have won for those two movies. I agree with you on that. How did you get cast in Spaceballs?
I'm in a bar in Santa Monica, and I just got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to be a friend of mine, Tim Reid, who played for the Chicago Bears, the '85 Bears, fixed me up with this girl named Trish. She Mel Brooks happens to be in a restaurant, and he sees this beautiful girl. He didn't see me. I was sitting down on the stool. She was standing up. He sees this tall, beautiful girl. He walks all the way around to take a look at her, and he sees me. And he said, "Hey, Dreesen, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, hi, Mel. How you doing?" "Mel, this is a girl I'm dating. Her name is Trish." And, she's just gorgeous, breathtaking, gorgeous. And we're talking. He said, "Dreesen, what are you doing Monday?" I said, "What do you want me to do Monday?" He said, "Wait, let me explain. I said, "Whatever you want me to do, I'm there." He said, "Well, I'm doing a movie called Spaceballs, and there's a role, it's only a few lines, Tom." I said, first of all, he said, I said, "What do you want me to do Monday?" He said, "Well, I'm doing a movie." I said, "I'll do it." He said, "Wait, let me tell you about the part." I said, "I don't care what the part is. I'll do it." And so he said a few lines, and if you do it. So that's how I got that movie. And I'll tell you something interesting. In that movie, if you remember, I die because my character dies because the lead, and I forgot his name, doggone it.
Bill Pullman.
Comes into what?
Bill Pullman.
Yeah, right, exactly. When he comes in and catches me, I'm shaving, and I'm a guard, and I think he's my fellow guard. And I said, like, "Lothario, is that you?" And I said, "Wait a minute, you're not Lothario." And I said, screaming, "Guards, guards!" And he has a ring that can draw objects to him. So he draws this can of shaving cream to his hand.
Yeah.
And then I'm yelling, "Guard," and he sprays it in my mouth.
Yeah.
And I die. But what happened was it was whipped cream inside that can.
Yeah.
They set it like in a window or something like that. When he sprayed it in my mouth, it was sour.
Oh.
Now, it was sour milk in my mouth. When I hit the floor, I'm gagging, but the scene is still rolling. And I'm gagging. I'm, just like trembling. And finally, when Mel yelled, "Cut," I bolt for the bathroom, had my head inside the toilet. And Mel comes in and he said, "Dreesen," he thought I was nervous over the scene or something. He said, "Dreesen, what's wrong?" I said, "God, Mel, what was in that can?" So he goes and he said, "Oh, geez, it's sour milk, And we had to do the scene 2 more times,
Yeah.
But anyhow, he kept me on for 2 days, and today, that was how many years ago? I get checks today for $2.67, and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Nice.
It was a fun. I might have made, I don't know, 40,000-50,000 over that because it's just airs and it airs and it airs and it airs,
Yeah. Oh, everyone loves that movie. Do you think Jim Carrey did an accurate portrayal of Andy Kaufman?
Let me tell you how accurate that portrayal was. I'm in the green room with him, and not the green room, in the makeup room, before we go out. And we're talking like we talk. Hey, Tom, what you doing? I go out, and I do my scene. I'm the Comic-Con before Andy, when Andy was new, right? And I come off stage, and I walk all the way off the stage, out of the scene, and then I almost said Andy, because Tim comes out doing Andy, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was like watching someone rise from the dead. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. The way he had that character down. And when he finished that scene, and they went cut, and he walked off, I rushed over to Bud Friedman, who was in the audience, and Bud adored Andy Kaufman. Bud, helped discover Andy Kaufman in New York. I went up to say something to Bud, and tears were rolling down his eyes, and he waved his hand to get away, for me to get away, because he couldn't handle it, Because I was going to say, Bud, do you believe? It was like watching somebody rise from the dead. It was just an unbelievable portrayal.
He should have gotten the Academy Award nomination. I thought he was just brilliant as Andy Kaufman.
Really was.
So what do you think of today's stand-up comedy?
Well, stand-up comedians, or are you talking about sitcoms?
I mean, just today's stand-up comedy, because it's way different than from when you started.
Well, here's the distinct difference: is in 1975, like I said, wherever you go, people would say, "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a stand-up comedian." They'd say, "Oh, have you ever been on Johnny Carson?" So as businessmen, we're in show business. That's 2 words. Show and business. You look and say, "How can I get on the Johnny Carson?" So you watch and you realize you've got to write material that can make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. So it's got to be clean. You got to have clean material, and that's the difference. The difference is today I'll give you a good example. I was at the Laugh Factory a couple of weeks ago trying out new material, and I was around the corner. I was upstairs going over my notes, and around the corner were two comedians who didn't know I was there. And I heard them talking, and one of them said, Tom Dreesen is here. The other comedian said, oh, yeah, he's old school. And the other comedian said, he's old school? What do you mean by that? He said, well, he doesn't use the F word. And the other comedian said, he doesn't use the F word. What does he use for adjectives? And I stuck my head around the corner, and I said, adjectives. That's what I use for adjectives. See, the problem with the F word, it's a noun, it's a pronoun, it's an adverb, it's an adjective. Whenever you can't think of anything clever, you go there.
Yeah.
When you use any adjective in comedy more than 3 or 4 times, it loses its effect. It just loses its effect. If you keep saying, the adjective, it'll lose its effect. The new comics, they rely on it. Young kids, they think that's comedy. They've never seen a Jack Benny or a Bob Hope or an Alan King or those kind of comedians, George Burns. They've never seen those comedians. So they think the first comedy club they go to, and this guy's effing this and effing that, and mother effing this and mother, they think, oh, that's comedy. And so that's one of the distinct differences. The other thing is that if in 75, if somebody would say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. They would go, wow, Martha, honey, come here. He's a stand-up comedian. Today, this is what they say. You say, what do you do for a living? You say, I'm a stand-up comedian. They say, oh, so's my dentist. My dentist does it on weekends. My wife's gynecologist is a stand-up comedian, too. My brother-in-law does stand-up comedy. Yeah, he's the president of the bank, but he does stand-up comedy. So everybody's a stand-up comedian today, And the competition is enormous. And there's no one show that's going to launch you anymore, like Tonight Show can. You could do 20 Tonight Shows today, and people still would not know who you are. But if you're clever with social media, that's where you can get launched. And I'm an old school guy, so the social media isn't, even though I have Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff, I'm not adept at it. Dane Cook, there was a thing called MySpace. He got on it early.
Yep.
And the next thing you know, Dane Cook was filling 20,000-seat arenas.
Mm-hmm.
Say what you mean. Whether you like a comedian or you don't like a comedian, a lot of people, they may not like my comedy, because no one's going to ever be like everything you do, But Dane Cook was brilliant at getting his name out there and making a fortune doing it,
Yeah, the first couple of years I did comedy, I told everyone I was a comedian, and I made a complete ass out of myself saying that because they put me on the spot and stuff, and I wasn't ready to claim to be a comedian. I should have said, I'm trying to be a comedian, and I still think I'm trying.
Well, yeah, you're right. That's the right approach to it. The one mistake several mistakes comedians make, and I was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're ready before you're not, before you are. You think you're ready, and I say, when you think you're really ready, do it for one more year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you really, really, really well. But we all think we're ready sooner than what we are. And the other mistake that comedians make is they try to compare themselves to other comedians. They'll say, gee, I started out with Tommy, and now Tommy's doing Letterman show. He's doing, the Jimmy Fallon show. And I started out before him. They compare themselves to another comedian. Mm. There's a great Hindu proverb that says, there's nothing noble about being superior to another man. True nobility lies in being superior to your former self. Am I a better friend than I was last year? Am I a better dad than I was last year? Am I a better son than I was last year? Am I a better husband than I was last year? Am I a better comedian than I was last year? So your only competition throughout your comedy career is your former self. Keep your tapes. Tape yourself. Have I grown in the last year? Have I taken my current act and polished it and developed it and added new material? That's your only competition your whole life. I never wanted to be funnier than David Letterman or Jay Leno or those. I started out with Robin, brilliant comedian that he was. I just wanted to be the funniest Tom Dreesen I could be. And that's your only competition is your former self.
That's so true. Yes, sir. That you remain, pretty active. You're still going out there and performing. Do you think you'll ever retire?
No. And I'll tell you what makes me say that. when I was a big fan of George Burns. I had done the Dean Martin roast with him and everything. And George Burns, I was in Tahoe working at Harrah's, and he was at Caesars in Lake Tahoe. And I ran over to catch a show, and he was 95 years old at that time. Mm-hmm. He didn't run out to the microphone, but when he got there, he did a strong 95 minutes. I mean, a strong hour, you know. And he was 95 years old. And I went backstage afterward to say hello to him, and he was looking at some cue cards, 3x5 cards. And I said, "How you doing, George?" He said, "Oh, doing fine, Tommy." He said, "I was working on some new material tonight." He was looking at his notes. And I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to be 95 years old working on new material. You know, that's where I want to be." And, you know, at 95, Caesar's Palace offered him a 5-year contract, and he turned it down. He said because he wasn't sure Caesar's Palace would be around in 5 years.
Yeah. Oh,
that's why I want to do it for the rest of my life.
Oh, that's great. I hope you do, Tom. Do you have any upcoming gigs you want to plug?
Well, you can always go to my website, tomdreesen.com. D as in David, R-E-E-S-E-N. Dreesen, D-R-E-E-S-E-N.com. I'll tell you where I'm at. But I'm writing a book of my life of going from shining shoes in a bar and hearing Sinatra on the jukebox to one day being a pallbearer at his funeral in Beverly Hills. So I'm writing a book about my childhood, my military years, you know, the meeting with Tim and Tom, the going on from there. So, and it's got a lot of funny, really funny stories in it. So I'm concentrating on that. They're doing a documentary on my life that's going to probably be aired sometime next year. Just a lot of other things that I'm doing, you know, personal things, and as well as, and then working on my golf game, which I'm going to after I leave your conversation here. I give motivation speeches too, which is a passion of mine. I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind. So I talk on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 subjects. And I do it for corporate America for money, but I do it for comedians, and I've done it in New York and Chicago, Boston, and L.A. I do it to motivate them to be all they can be. And I call it the joy of stand-up comedy and how to get there. So that's fun for me, too. So I get a pretty busy schedule.
Oh, that's magnificent, Tom. This was just one of the biggest honors of my life. I thank you so much, and I hope I get to meet you someday, and I will continue to, support you and your products you put out to the world. And I hope you have happy holidays, and God bless you, sir.
Same to you, Tommy, and I wish you all the best in your career. And yeah, if you ever see me anywhere, come up and say hello. I'd love to meet you.
Sure will, sir. Thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Tom Dreesen. Ain't he a cool dude? Thank you so much, Tom. You have a very intelligent, insightful, zen approach to life and comedy, and it was such an honor to interview you, sir. It was one of the greatest honors of my life, and I know you're going to continue being the amazing man that you are. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes!